Hello, my name is Dr. Rob O'Connor. I am a lecturer in creative writing and creative industries at York St John University. My thanks to the CRSF conference team for allowing me to present on China Miéville and the ABCANNY monstrous. This paper is entitled A New Weird Teratology, the Tentacular Monster as ABCANNY Body in the Work of China Miéville. In it I will outline what I define the tentacular and the ABCANNY to be and provide some brief examples from the work of the writer China Miéville. This paper is the exploration of a current research idea, so your comments and questions are welcome and appreciated. Many thanks. In 2011, the British writer China Miéville was a guest of honour at the International Conference of the Fantastic in the Arts. His conference speech, entitled On Monsters, or 9 or More Monstrous Not Cannies, explored Miéville's ideas of the monstrous body through an interconnected series of critical flash observations. One of these critical flashpoints was the idea of the ABCANNY monstrous. To highlight the kind of body to which he was referring, Miéville defines the ABCANNY monster in very clear terms as a weird fiction creation, deliberately devoid of definition. And to quote Miéville, the monsters of the ABCANNY are teratological expressions of that unrepresentable and unknowable, the evasive of meaning. Hence the enormous preponderance of shapeless, oozing gloopiness in the ABCANNY monstrous, the stress on formlessness, shapes that ostentatiously evade symbolic decoding by being all shapes and no shapes. The ABCANNY monster represents a freedom from binary oppositions, an alternative physicality which we can use as a metaphorical canvas to illustrate and explore an inexplicable contemporary world. Even though the ABCANNY body is devoid of binary associations, it is simultaneously suffused with symbolic power, and Miéville embraces this in his own work, stating, "These monsters mean while they meta unmean." Miéville refers to weird fiction as being suffused with otherness. In the essay Weird Fiction, Miéville clearly understands this relationship between what he calls revolutionary teratology and weird fiction's detachment from the return of the repressed witnessed in the uncanny. For Miéville, the monsters of weird fiction represent a break from folkloric, even Gothic traditions, and this is most effectively represented by the indescribable biomass of the tentacle. The use of the tentacular in fantastical fiction therefore becomes important, as these kind of texts reinstate the tentacular as the physical manifestation of a lack of recognition. The tentacular, due to its nature to be formless and evade meaning, is therefore imbued with ABCANNY qualities. The squid or cephalopod, represented by the tentacle, quickly establishes itself as an avatar of ABCANNY-ness, its unique physiological ability to change form, colour and shape, reflecting most effectively this gloopy formlessness associated with ABCANNY teratology in Miéville's mind. Miéville, in On Monsters, states that Julia Kristeva's theory of abjection is not the source of his use of the prefix ab in his naming of the ABCANNY, stating that it instead refers to abnormal. However, it is interesting to associate the ontological deconstruction witnessed in Miéville's evaluation of the ABCANNY with the similar dissolving of boundaries witnessed through the theoretical spectrum of abjection put forward by Kristeva. In the 1982 work The Power of Horror, Kristeva jumps immediately into succinct and powerful definition, where the abject is in direct opposition with the I, and this opposition is what the abject of course shares with the uncanny too. Whereas the uncanny, although opposed to the I, does bear some familiarity to the observer, in fact its power lies in the familiar simultaneously becoming unfamiliar, the abject body is a much more violent interjection. Quote, elaborated through a failure to recognize its kin. Nothing is familiar, not even the shadow of a memory. Therefore, the abject contains no schema of reference for the observer at all, and, as a result, it is banished and repressed, our conscious mind unwilling to accept it. This is a theoretical position akin to Miéville's interpretation of the ABCANNY as well. This is a key point. The abject is a disruption of physical boundaries. Kristeva's famous example of skin on milk, quote, the most elementary and most archaic form of abjection, representing an unnatural disruption in our perception of the physical form of the milk itself. It is the psychological reaction of the drinker to this disruption which creates the abject effect. The abject disrupts fragile ontological boundaries. This taps into deep-rooted fears about internalized othering of the self. Abjection becomes monstrous through application of body horror motifs, disrupting our perception of what a body actually is. The augmentation of the human body produces new forms of the monstrous. The repulsion of body horror, most often achieved through graphic descriptions, pushes these types of bodies into the sphere of the abject. Some bodies are simultaneously uncanny and abject. At once they are familiar yet unfamiliar, evoking the uncanny effect, whilst also creating a sense of repulsion and a feeling of unnatural disruption, creating a sense of abjection. It therefore makes sense for us to refer to these types of bodies as abcanny, due to this simultaneity. The most common examples involve alien and incomprehensible examples of physical form, such as body horror attachments or manifestations crafted from bodily fluids which are usually internalized, such as blood, semen, feces, urine, or perhaps even menstrual blood. The abcanny monster, therefore, is gloopy, slippery, shape-shifting. They have a dramatic influence on the stability of identity and order. They exist in a state of transition. For this reason, they become incredibly symbolic, not only representing our desire to maintain order in terms of our own individual identity, but also as avatars for a world that is in disarray and constantly shifting. Abjection, Kristeva's abjection, does have a role to play here. Repulsion, body horror, and hybridity are all useful tools in the deconstruction of ontological boundaries present in the theory of the abject. The concept of the tentacular, then, is the perfect physical embodiment of this abcanny ideal, a shifting, writhing, unstoppable, incomprehensible mass. What we also see is that the abject can be incorporated alongside Miéville's definition too. Let's go back to Miéville. He is intrigued by cephalopods which constantly infiltrate his thought and work. In his essay Alien Evasion, Miéville sums up the appeal of the cephalopod as a monstrous entity, and the quote is here. In this essay, Miéville alludes to the alterity of cephalopods, their truly alien form. It is this alterity that makes tentacular beasts so appealing to horror and fantasy writers. Lovecraft's Cthulhu, Tolkien's Watcher in the Water, Jules Verne's colossal squid in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. These are all tangible examples of the horror of the alien, the unknown, and the other. Tentacles best replicate the just glimpsed beast-shaped burr which Miéville discusses here. They move swiftly, grasping, constricting, reaching. Their similarities to fingers imbues tentacles with a sense of abcanniness, an appendage that operates in a familiar way to us, but is at the same time completely alien to us. The presence of the tentacular is a significant recurrence within Miéville's work. A prominent example is The Embassy of the Sea in Kraken from 2010. In the novel, all supernatural and elemental powers are democratically represented, Miéville's socialist and political views bleeding into the narrative. And the missing squid god Archie warrants a visit to the Embassy of the Sea for assistance. Our suspicions are confirmed towards the end of the novel when the fevered search brings us back to the embassy and the front door of the innocuous London townhouse is broken down, unleashing a giant brine fist of seawater and accompanying creatures into the street. Once inside, the protagonist Billy and his companions are met with a setting simultaneously magical and disgusting. Quote, vivid colours of pelagic dwellers is contrasted with a bathtub brimmed with a panicking crowd of fish. Coralline constructions contrasted to a huge sagging body, something he could not work out, though he saw eyes see him from a meat heap. It is the description of the meat heap here which is important. To Billy, this is something he can't work out, something indescribable, which belongs to Kristeva's interpretation of the abject. Billy's reaction, or more importantly his lack of comprehension, is what creates the shift away from the gothic uncanny towards a sense of the weird abcanny. The unrecognizable biomass, the tentacular, if you will, is the motif that articulates this shift. Another example of abcanny tentacular monstrosity in Miéville's work is the character of Motley. Motley is a misshapen grotesque, an amalgamation of biological parts, barely recognizable as being human. He is simultaneously abcanny, his multi-limbed hybrid body beyond our kind of comprehension, it's difficult for us to imagine Motley's form. We share Lynn's initial disgust of Motley. His abcanny body positions him firmly within the motif of the monster. Yet we also find an alignment between Motley's biological disfigurement and Lynn's fascination with him. She begins to look past the initial horror and find aesthetic admiration in Motley's, quote, bizarre flesh, of which the hues are too spectacular, too arresting, not to be represented. Indeed, Motley's ego allows him to see beyond the pathological imperfections of his body. He reprimands Lynn accordingly, accusing her of only being interested in what was and how it went wrong, before he declares, whilst just gesticulating his own body, that this is totality. However, Miéville still restricts our perspective of Motley, providing mere snapshots of his physiology, limiting him to what Carl Freeman describes as a never quite intelligible hodgepodge of disparate parts that are untotalized by any graspable logic into any sort of recognizable form. A perfect description of the abcanny, in my mind. This confirms Motley as an uncanny body, reminiscent perhaps of Lovecraft's indescribable Cthulhu. Miéville does provide some individual elements of Motley's description, such as shards of chitin and pachyderm skin, while still maintaining an overall abcanniness regarding Motley's form. As with several of Miéville's creations, the sense of the weird abcanny is created through considerations of body horror and hybridity, rather than the overwhelming cosmic dread that we witness in Lovecraftian style fiction. Miéville's principal exploration of the abcanny body in his work is the remade. Citizens of Baslag who have been found guilty of a crime and been dispatched to the punishment factories, where they are grafted with biological or mechanical parts to reflect their crimes. In Perdo Street Station, for instance, the journalist Durkan Blueday describes witnessing a remade sentencing and the punishment delivered. Quote, some woman living at the top of one of the Ketch Heath monoliths killed her baby, smothered it or shook it or jabber knows what, because it wouldn't stop crying. The magister sentences her. Prison, of course, 10 years, I think, but it was the remaking that I remember. Her baby's arms are going to be grafted to her face, so she doesn't forget what she did, he says. It's worth noting the return of the tentacular in this extract, represented through the baby's arms, an abcanny appendage cruelly incorporated into that person's physical body. Remaking is the crafting of abcanny bodies for the purpose of punishment, oppression, or control. The bodies of the remade transgress beyond the awe and numinosity of Lovecraftian weird monsters, shifting focus from the cosmos to a more socio-political commentary regarding oppressed and manipulated bodies. In conclusion, let us enter the depths of the Darwin Centre at the Natural History Museum. Here lie the specimens that constitute the Spirit Collection tour. After passing through airlocks, you are presented with a room full of steel cabinets. There is a mechanically controlled chill in the air, a perfectly maintained temperature. The tank room is a vast chamber containing the collection's largest and most important specimens, jars with handwritten labels, the word beagle in a flowing script, and tentacles, lots of tentacles, frozen in time, reaching for you. A 9-meter tank dominates the room, the cloudy yellow brine formalin slowly revealing its contents like a ghostly abcanny god, the giant squid, a real-life kraken, Archie. The tour guide delights in talking about Archie's fans, stories of visitors and their reactions. She mentions a man who talked about a book that depicts Archie being stolen. After visiting the Spirit Collection, rereading the opening of China Miéville's novel Kraken conjures up a sense of déjà vu. Following our tour guide, I am reminded of Miéville's cephalopod curator Billy Harrow and his initial discovery of Archie's disappearance. It is easy to see how Miéville may have been inspired by his own visit to the collection. Our own wonderment at the sight of Archie is matched by Miéville, who remarks upon entering the room as breaching, quote, a Schwarzschild radius of something not canny, and that cephalopod corpse was the singularity. Miéville's description of Archie as not canny invites us to consider the tentacular monster as a body which stretches beyond comprehension, something free from the restrictions of our normal perceptions of the biological. It is an entity which imprints itself upon the human consciousness and imagination, encouraging us to wander beyond preconceived ideas of the body to consider alternatives to familiar ontological categories. In On Monsters, Miéville concludes his teratological exploration with one final hope, that monsters, quote, help just occasionally with thinking and become permanent parts of our conceptual arsenal, as it is, for example, my sincere aspirations that the ABCANNY does. The growing presence and critical appreciation for the ABCANNY tentacular suggests that his hope is being realized. The tentacular monster has the power to hold our attention, tap into our deepest fears regarding the self, and express something to us about the chaotic networks of the contemporary moment. Long live the tentacle indeed. Welcome to the ABCANNY monstrous. Thank you very much. Just a quick look at my works cited. Thank you. Welcome your questions.